Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the ET Base Podcast. I'm your host, David, along with my good friend Star, and we're here to bring you more information about what's going on in the ET universe. And today we have a special subject which we'd like to cover. We want to cover the idea of Skinwalker Ranch, what it represents, how you can use it in your own way in terms of contact, and how it relates to the general ranch energy. So, let's talk about why we are discussing Skinwalker Ranch. We'll start with talking about that. It's a very important subject. There's a lot of exploration going there. A lot of people will know about the TV programs there. There are a lot of things going on there and paranormal activity, and we'll get into that. There's also talk about the idea that it's part of a means of contact for ETs, which is one of the main reasons we want to have it on this particular podcast. And there's a lot of things that can actually happen in the near future there, and we'll get into that as well, which will be very exciting for a lot of people in this podcast. So let's go ahead and do this. So what we're going to do is a bit different this time because Star has been at Skinwalker Ranch multiple times, actually. I'm going to ask her a lot of questions in sort of an interview format, and we'll see where the conversation goes from there. So, Star, how are you today?
I am doing fabulous, David. How are you?
I'm fantastic as always. So why don't you tell us about what Skinwalker Ranch actually is? Can you describe it for us?
Yes, Skinwalker Ranch, one of my favorite topics, might I add. Been there multiple times now, and I think that is something that is very relevant for my own ET contact journey, as well as it will be for other people. So let's go ahead and cover some of the basics of the ranch. So, like you said, what is the ranch actually, right? Let's start there. So, Skinwalker Ranch is an actual ranch. It is known for particularly skinwalker sightings, as well as other paranormal activities such as ET sightings, interdimensional beings, so on and so forth. It is not actually just taking place on the actual ranch, but like the surrounding areas. So you can look at it almost as a territory of land, roughly 3 or 4 miles long. It consists of a mesa that surrounds the actual ranch where a lot of the activity happens.
So where exactly is this ranch in Utah that you mentioned?
So the ranch itself is actually, for anyone who's familiar with Utah, it's roughly 3.5 hour drive to the east of Salt Lake City. It's close to a little place called Gusher, as well as Vernal, Utah, and it's all basically on tribal land. So it's kind of off grid in the middle of nowhere, which, of course, that in and of itself is very conducive to sightings as well. So, when we talk about what is the actual ranch, so what exactly can be found on the ranch as far as what is actually present there? So, one of the things is the mesa. This is a big chunk of land, and underneath it, there's a cabin system where beings basically can facilitate the balancing of the energies. Now, you can actually see the mesa if you go to the ranch. It's like a big pile of land and rocks. So you can't go on top of the actual mesa because it's tribal land that's protected, but you can very much see it and almost touch it, so to speak. And what's also interesting is that at nighttime, it has a tendency to light up, even though technically nothing is on it. So it's an interesting phenomena. But again, it's been said that underneath the mesa, there's a big cabin system where various beings work. This is also interestingly kind of confirmed by the TV show called The Secrets of the Skinwalker Ranch, where they have taken certain technologies. I believe it's infrared, but I could be wrong about that. But basically, they've taken whatever equipment they had and they kind of were able to photograph what was underneath the mesa. And they kind of confirmed that there was a tunnel system there. So that's pretty interesting. Another thing that can be found under the mesa is a spaceship. So it is said that this is actually an ancient gray spaceship that's there, that's stationary. This is not a spaceship that's used for flying, but it's kind of there almost as like a base for beings who wish to come to the ranch, who wish to enter and leave the ranch. they can actually use that as a teleportation location because the energies are kind of all over the map there. It kind of gives them like a localized place to enter and come and go without any issues. So it's been said that the spaceship is used for teleportation, and also because of the super hyperconductive materials, it is also used to keep certain energies in check there. Now, this is also very interesting because Bashar and other channelers have said that within 1 or 2 years, we actually will discover that spaceship. And I believe they have drilled into some of the mesa, but they weren't really able to get through at the time because when you drill into those types of energies, they can basically bounce back to you and give you a lot of symptoms. Those symptoms can be very paralyzing for some people if they're not prepared. And I believe that's actually what happened to some of the people on the show. They had like
Concussions.
concussions, and I believe one person almost got almost internally decapitated. So it was pretty serious. But I believe that they will figure out a way to do that within 1 or 2 years, as has been predicted. So it should be very interesting to see what happens with that. They have been able to retrieve some tiny fragments of metal, I believe, and that does come from the spaceship. So there already has been some progress made with that. That's something very exciting to look forward to. And then the third thing I wanted to mention was it's been said that there is a very large Skinwalker Ranch lab underneath the whole structure. And basically, what this lab does is because there's so many energies going on there all the time, it is actually said that beings need to kind of be there to balance them out and keep them in check, right? Because otherwise, people could literally just kind of fly in and out and disappear. It's been mentioned that certain energies that come in, even the beings themselves don't really know what they are yet or where they come from or how it affects certain things. So they are kind of there to study that and either let that through or not. And also, I believe there is some spacecraft technology that's being tested, and specifically how it responds to and relates to these energies that are present at Skinwalker Ranch. So there's a lot of activity underneath the surface, ET activity that actually takes place there by beings that occupy that zone. And so there's definitely a lot of stuff to keep in mind when you're there. And this is also why it's said that you can get this feeling of there is a lot of traffic, there is a lot of movement, there is a lot of energy, but it's all underground. It creates this very odd, strange feeling paradox of a lot of traffic, a lot of energy, but on top of the ground, it's very tranquil and very peaceful and almost blissful. So this basically is an interdimensional portal, and it is the only double portal that is to be found on our planet Earth. So what does that mean exactly, right? So when you think of a portal, basically what is a portal? It's a place of high electromagnetic energies that are present there, which make it much easier for ETs and other beings to come and go. The way this portal formed there was actually there's two different things that happened. So the first one was there was an impact crater at Upheaval Dome. It was a meteorite strike that happened a long time ago, and when that meteorite hit, it created a lot of electromagnetic energies in that area, which opened up the first portal. So that was like the first natural portal that was formed there. Now, because the energies were so intense there, and so compacted, the ETs actually came in, certain ET groups, and they, on top of that, created another portal. So it functions as a double portal, and it is the only double portal on Earth. So because of that, there's a lot of traffic, a lot of experiences that people have there. It's again, it's very well known for paranormal experiences, skinwalkers, interdimensional beings such as ghosts, ETs, so on and so forth. So let's talk about why is there a lot of traffic there? So the reason that a lot of contact experiences can be had there is because of these portals. So what that means is because the energies are much higher, right? The vibration is much higher. That makes it a lot easier for beings to be able to come in and use that as a gateway to enter our realm, because a lot of these beings, be it ETs, spirits, ghosts, interdimensional beings, so on and so forth, you have to remember they're of a much higher frequency and vibration than we are. So it's not necessarily as easy for them to enter our realm as we think it is. And so they will use a lot of these locations, such as Skinwalker Ranch or, say, Sedona or Mount Shasta, because the energies there and the vibrations are much higher, which makes it easier for them to come and go. And this is why you have so much traffic at Skinwalker Ranch. This is also why it is really a perfect place to make first open contact. And it has been known as a place to make first open contact. There have been a lot of meetings there between ETs and humans going back to the 1700s. And it is said that if you go to Skinwalker Ranch with the intention of having contact, you will have contact, right? Now, this doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be full on open physical contact, because that depends on a lot of factors, primarily your own readiness, but you will have experiences of some sort. It's a place where they say ETs are very, very responsive to your own energy. And basically, they don't hold back from making contact with you there. So a lot of channelers have advised to go there and explore and just see what happens. And it is really a place that is very well known for establishing first contact. So it's really one of the best locations you can visit if you can. I would highly, highly suggest visiting a place like this. So let's talk about who actually occupies the ranch from our ET visitor and friends. So basically, there are a lot of different ET races that come and go and use the ranch for several reasons. It is basically known as the essence of the gray timeline. So a lot of the gray vibration and gray presence can be found on Skinwalker Ranch, as well as also parallel humans from the past and from the present. Now, of course, the Greys are parallel humans, so that goes without saying. But there also is apparently a lot of presence from our future parallel selves and our future parallel humans who are also able to come in and help us do various things there. Another thing that's present on Skinwalker Ranch is astral technology. So this is technology that works with vibrations, and apparently it is very intelligent and sentient, and it'll give each person that goes to the ranch exactly what they need in order to move forward in their own journey. Now, this is something that I've definitely experienced being there, and we will talk about that more in depth going forward. As far as what you may experience being there. So, because of the very intense energies and the high vibrations that are present at Skinwalker Ranch, you may experience things such as negative beliefs and energies coming to the surface. Now, it's important to know there's nothing actually negative or evil present at Skinwalker Ranch, but a lot of people, of course, are not completely integrated and still carry a degree of negative beliefs and traumas with them. And so all that stuff will definitely surface when you go there. Another thing that may happen is it's been said that when you go there, the ranch shows you very clearly who you are and who you're not. And it does that by opening a couple of timelines at once, multiple timelines. And the ones that are not you and the ones that are most you will really stand out to you. And this is something I've definitely experienced being there with multiple people, is you would really see people have very crazy transformations, right? Like they would make very abrupt changes in their own lives. They had sudden clarity about who they want to be and how they want to live their life and what their purpose is and even what gender they want to be. So some very unexpected things can come from the ranch. Another thing that happens, of course, is you may have a lot of ET or interdimensional encounters. This can happen in many different ways, such as dream encounters. It can be sightings. And also, people have actually had real open contact experiences there because, again, that is kind of what it's known for those who are ready. So you may experience a lot of contacts there in various forms, and really also a lot of reality shifts. And I think it's a place that really shifts you as a person and makes you just experience very different realities. And it completely shifts your take on what reality is and what kind of world we live in and what else is out there. And so it is a very, very unique place. So let's talk about what can be found on the actual ranch itself. So there's a very big mesa that's present on Skinwalker Ranch. And this mesa, underneath it, has a cabin system where beings can basically facilitate the balancing of the energies there. So it's almost like you can look at it as a facility of multiple beings where they work with the energies. Another thing that's present there is the spaceship. Now, the spaceship is not necessarily for flying around, but it's said that this is an ancient gray spaceship that is kept there underneath the ground in order to keep things in check as far as the energies. And it's also used by several beings to teleport in and out of the ranch. So, this is actually something that, for those of you who are familiar with the TV show Secrets of the Skinwalker Ranch, this is something that they actually touched on and have sort of proven in a sense because they've done these imagery. I believe it may be infrared or something else, but they basically discovered that there's tunnels underneath the mesa. And they've also dug it within the mesa and they've come across certain hyperconductive metal materials that are said to come from the spaceship itself. Now, this has also given people a lot of symptoms, right? Because you're dealing with very specific high energies. And so it's said that when you drill into it, that that energy bounces back and can cause all kinds of effects on people. So it's also said that Bashar and several different channelers have also said that actually this or the next year will be when they actually will be successful in digging into the mesa and actually reaching the spaceship. So that, of course, will be a big part of disclosure, you can assume, and the advancing of contact in general. So that's going to be something very exciting to look forward to. One thing that also Skinwalker Ranch is known for, and that people have attempted, which also has been shown on the TV show, was the 1.6 gigahertz. So what that is it's a specific frequency that a lot of ETs use for space travel and to communicate with each other and with Earth. And it's also a frequency that's used to open portals. So the TV show, I think, actually captured this when they brought in a bunch of tribal people on drums to do shamanic practices there. And they actually were able to reach that frequency and they recorded again with these infrared cameras and other technology that they have. They actually were able to see a portal appear in front of them. So these portals, it's said that people that go through these portals may have a difficult time coming back from them. So it's also been said that if that does happen, that your own guides can bring you back. And the way to know a portal has been opened is basically when you chant, and there's certain techniques you can use, like you can do the Om meditation, you can project the 1.6 gigahertz, like Bashar and several other channelers have mentioned. And when you actually hear the echo back, that tells you that the portal is open. So let's talk about the connection to other portals and vortices. So Skinwalker Ranch, like I mentioned earlier, it was actually created by the meteorite impact that happened at Upheaval Dome, not too far away. So that also created other vortexes in the area and other portals. So it is very much connected to, for instance, Sedona and other portals within the southwest of the United States. And it is also actually, it uses the same grid work for the ranches with other ranches, such as Bradshaw Ranch and other ranches in that area. So they're all very much connected. And if you can't make it to Skinwalker Ranch, you can also visit one of these other locations because they are connected. So you may have experiences there as well.
So yeah, that's a great explanation and a lot of information for people to unpack and consider. So thanks for all that information. Let's get into some questions I have about all this. So what was the thing that led up to actually going to Skinwalker Ranch? What attracted you to that? When did it happen? Tell us about the story and the chronology of how that occurred.
Yeah, so I've heard about the ranch multiple times in, like the entertainment circles, social media, on television, pop culture, essentially, things like that. So I was a little bit familiar with it, but all I really knew was that it was really mostly about like skinwalkers and paranormal activities. So it was kind of in the back of my mind, I didn't really pay too much attention to it. And then, sort of like the more we went on our own AT journey with ourselves and certain channelers, it was said that that actually is like a very good place to go if you want to have first open contact. And, when I heard that, I was like, okay, this is cool. And maybe one day we'll go. And then, as synchronicity had it, actually, a couple of my friends and I, we were planning a trip to go to Sedona to see Bashar. This was last year. And so we were like, well, since we're going to be not necessarily in the area, but we'll be traveling around, why not just go to Skinwalker Ranch? And so that's exactly what we decided to do. And yeah, and that's basically how I ended up going there.
Yeah, that's quite a synchronicity there, right? Because you were there for a completely different purpose, and then you wound up going there through the connections to the others. What did you actually anticipate or expect was going to happen when you get there? You must have had some idea. Did you have any sort of, I don't know, intuition or gut feeling about that?
Yeah, sure. So, of course, my first intuition was, or my desire, let's say, I was like, I'm just going to go there and have full on open contact, right? Like that whole fantasy. So, I
Hmm.
kind of went into it thinking, like, okay, I'm just going to show up and it's going to be so easy and beings will materialize and I'll see UFOs. And I thought it was going to be very sort of like in front of me, right? And it really wasn't like that at all. So I've been there twice now, and I would say the first time I went there, it was with a group of friends, and it was more of like a social thing because it was like six or seven of us, and it was just this like really, really exciting thing. So yeah, we just kind of went and we didn't really know what to expect and what would come out of it, but we definitely have had some crazy experiences going there, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But initially, I would say, putting that fantasy aside of like, okay, I'm going to have full on open contact, I really didn't know what to expect. I was just open to it. I think I just kind of let it be. And I was just excited to be there with my friends. And so that was really like the highlight of it anyway, right? It's just to go and have fun with your friends and see what happens. And so I would say I was pretty open when I went there.
Yeah, I totally get that. And of course, just being there for the first time was probably just an exciting experience. But, I understand you were talking about this before that you had a lot of different experiences at the ranch, which people would consider exotic or exciting, and even some really crazy ones as well. Tell us about some of those.
Yeah, so the first time I was there, it was pretty mellow, I would say. So again, nothing really crazy seemed to happen. We were just kind of having fun, driving around, walking around, taking pictures, taking videos, things like that. We did have a bunch of sightings of black triangular ships as well as kind of like saucer looking ships. And then I would say the first time not much really happened. So the other thing we did was actually we were able to meet up with the security guard at Skinwalker Ranch because so it's private property, right? So you can't really get onto the actual ranch. But that doesn't mean that you can't have contact experiences because again, that energy is so huge and it basically spreads out all across the mesa. So we still were able to have amazing experiences, but we didn't want to go as close to the ranch as we possibly could. So we did, and we actually ended up making contact with the security guard on the show that works for the secrets of the Skinwalker Ranch. So we were able to talk to him a little bit about it. And, I would say we were kind of just doing more exploring and taking it all in. And at first glance, not much actually seemed to happen when I was there. I just remember taking a lot of videos, a lot of pictures, a lot of footage. And for me, I would say it really wasn't until I left the ranch and I started going over my footage and what I captured and several other things that were happening as well. That's when I realized, like, wow, like a lot of things happened there. For instance, I saw a mothership, what looked like a mothership fly by because it was basically huge, right? So, like, you would have sightings anyway of like smaller ships all the time. But this thing was much different because it was just absolutely humongous and it didn't have any lights on it, right? It was like pitch black, V-shaped
And this was at
form.
night, right?
This was at nighttime, yes. And so as it flew by, it basically blocked out the stars. And so that's how we knew it was like a ginormous mothership. So yeah, so we had that humongous mothership sighting, which was very exciting. And I actually tried to capture that on camera and I just couldn't. In other words, I tried to film it and it would show up on my phone. But then as I went over the footage, it was just completely black. So, and I asked the channeler about that afterwards, like, why did that not show up? Whereas the other smaller ships would show up. And he basically said that it's because the energies and the vibrations of motherships are so humongous that our technology just, as of now, cannot capture it.
Interesting.
Another thing I captured, for instance, was it was a smaller ship and it was kind of hovering and then it just shot off like in hyperspeed to the right or the left, whichever way you want to approach it from. So that's actually something I caught on camera, which is very exciting. And I'm very happy to have that footage. And then another thing that happened, which is probably one of the craziest experiences I would say, was I was standing in front of the mesa and I was basically taking a selfie video, kind of like a 360 video of myself. And I had these sunglasses on that were very reflective. So as I was filming this, again, I didn't really see anything when I was there in real time, right? I didn't see anybody standing in front of me or walking by me or anything like that. It was just me by myself. But then when I went over the footage and I looked at it closer, more in depth, like frame by frame, I actually could see there was a being that basically walked right in front of me. He kind of like crossed my path, turned to me, and stuck his hand out to me to greet me. And then he walked on. This was a very slender being. It looked to me maybe like a tall white would look like, very white, white skinish, very slender. And I was very happy to have captured that on my in my sunglasses basically. But when I was there, I didn't see anything in front of me, right? So this is kind of what I mean by when I was there, all these things were going on around me, but I just had no idea, right? I couldn't really perceive it with my own eyes. But then looking back at my own footage, I was able to see like, wow, a lot of things actually did happen while I was there.
Yeah, it reminds me of some of these paranormal experiences where people don't actually see anything, but when they look in the mirror, they suddenly see something or they discover it in pictures later or whatever. It's very similar to that, it feels like to me. That's from your first visit, right?
Those are from both visits, actually.
Okay.
So it happened twice. It happened both times. And the mothership sighting was on the second time I was there. But before that, I mean, there were so many things in general, like I would, for instance, film a car driving by, and the person in the car, the driver, would shapeshift to a gray and then back to a human. Other things I would notice as well was like these weird flickering lights in the water, which at first glance you may think like, oh, that's just the stars or the sunlight, but they were almost like electrical, like they were like dancing around and changing like shapes and forms. And it was really cool to see, actually. That was another thing I experienced. And then another crazy thing, which was the highlight of the second trip, was I was actually with a friend who had like a very big connection to skinwalkers. Me myself, I'm more ET focused, so it's not really my area of focus, but she is somebody who was very much into the skinwalker phenomena. And she actually said that she had made contact with a skinwalker in a certain alley. And so she asked me to go there with her. So we end up going there, and it was nighttime, like pitch black, nobody's there. complete silence. And she calls out this being, right? And, I come from the ET world, right? Where ET contact, the way that's made is very, very slow. It's step by step, right? Symbol by symbol. So it can take a long time before you actually see or hear anything physically like that. So I really wasn't expecting much. But then as soon as she called this being, I swear to God, it was like this entity appeared in the bushes, right? And we both heard it. We heard these footsteps right in front of us. Again, we couldn't see it, but we heard it. And it was very loud and very heavy, almost like a heavy set being. And this being was running, like running towards us at like hyper speed, it seems. Like it took no time for it to come running from wherever, like, the end of the alley was to where we were in the bushes. It just took like a split second. I actually heard this being like breathe down my neck, right? Like I could hear the breaths in and out. And I just, again, I couldn't see it, but I felt it. I felt the presence and I heard it. And so did she. Yeah. So I believe that was an encounter of something, again, because she was so deeply into the skinwalkers and she was kind of summoning that being. I personally believe it was the skinwalker. But so yeah, there's been just a lot of very, very crazy, unique experiences I've had there.
Yeah, amazing contact experiences there of all kinds. I'm really intrigued by this thing that I've heard a lot of people say, and I want to hear your take on it. That you talked about it being dead quiet sometimes. People say that when you're at the ranch, that there's an eerie stillness, which is like more quiet or still than even the quietest place they've been in their entire lives. Did you experience anything like that?
Yeah, so the Skinwalker Ranch definitely has a very unique energy in that simultaneously you feel a lot of presence and a lot of traffic that's going on there. But at the same time, it's actually very, very tranquil and peaceful. And it's almost like a strange type of a peace, I would say. I remember the second time we were there, we were just kind of like sitting by the lake, with our feet in the water. And I actually filmed the lake because it was so incredibly still. It was like abnormal, right? Like it just almost looked like it was frozen in time or something. And the strange thing is you could feel there's stuff going on beneath the surface, but on top of the surface, it was almost like, not only was it super quiet and peaceful, but it was almost blissful, if that makes sense. It was almost like a strange hypnotic state you were in, almost like a trance. I can't really explain it. You just have to go there and experience it yourself. But it can be a very, very unique state of being that the ranch puts you in if you allow it.
Incredible. Yeah. Definitely something everyone will have to experience firsthand. Another thing that I find interesting, I know you're really into the gray ET race in particular. And for you, that started really at some point when you were actually at Skinwalker Ranch, at least in the serious way it is now, where it's something that you see all the time. Why don't you tell us about that story?
Yes, so I have always been very drawn to the grays, which is kind of unique because a lot of people are not. I think a lot of people are mostly into the IL, the Pleiadians, Sasani, so on and so forth. And the grays definitely have like kind of like a negative connotation for a lot of people. So people are not necessarily that drawn to the grays. But I've always felt very drawn to the grays. And I was actually told that if I were to go to Skinwalker Ranch, that something would happen there for me and I would create some type of an overlap with the gray reality. And from that moment on, I would live in a completely different physical reality than most people. And so I really didn't understand what that meant, right? So I just kind of went there, not really thinking about it. And again, seemingly nothing really happened at the ranch when I was there. But then basically the phenomena started when we were leaving the ranch, right? All of a sudden, I noticed that our technology wasn't working. So basically, like we were trying to, head back to the airport and our GPS wasn't functioning, right? And it was weird because it kept placing me, like the car, off the road. It just kept placing us in a ditch, basically. wherever we drove. And so it's we were actually circling the ranch for a good amount of time to get out of that, right? And then when we finally got to the airport and we were all kind of flying off in our own directions, that's kind of the first thing I noticed was when I was sitting on the plane back home. I remember it was a nighttime flight, and I remember I was looking out in front of me, and it just really seemed to me like a couple rows ahead of me, there was a person sitting there. And it's like, I swear, I could see it shapeshift from a human head to a gray head back to a human head. And then I look over to my left and I saw the same thing happen. And then I look over where the flight attendant was sitting, right? And I swear to God, I saw a gray sitting there looking at me. And I was like, I must be tripping. I must be seeing things, you know? And so I actually just started recording it on my phone, thinking, there's no way my phone will capture this. But it did. And I actually have that footage to this day. And basically, this is what's happened to me since that time I was at the ranch was something happened. I can't really explain what it is, but I've been told that because I have these strong gray connections and counterparts, that I basically tapped into the gray vibration or the gray resonance and kind of overlapped with it. So I kind of like brought it with me. So it's almost like they're in my reality now, like constantly. Wherever I look, I see grays. And it's very ethereal for now. It's not really full on physical, but I see them everywhere and I see them materialize in my environment, basically anywhere I look. My phone is also able to capture it, so that's another thing that I can't really explain. The technology on my phone is very different now because whenever I film something, basically like if I really zoom in, it's no longer like a regular video or photo. It's basically my whole reality is made up of like a billion of like tiny, tiny gray heads, and they constantly shapeshift. So I don't know what that is or how that got there, but that's on my phone ever since I came back from the ranch. And yeah, so my phone captures it now. If I film something, like 9 out of 10 times, a gray will show up or a sighting or something. So I'm able to perceive them and I'm able to capture them with my phone, with my technology. And I know they're always there and I feel they're always there. I also had a lot of gray dreams suddenly. I would have these dreams where they would like drive by in a car and like wave to me, like, oh, there you are finally, that kind of thing. I also had another thing I experienced when I just came back from the ranch. This was maybe like 2 days after I had come back the first time. I remember taking a nap and I literally thought I was gone for like 2 days. But when I looked at the clock, it was only 2 hours. But I literally felt like there's no way I slept for 2 hours. I was gone a minimum of 2 days. And I would have these dreams, which I don't think were really dreams. I've been told they were like abductions that happened after my visit to the ranch. And I basically remember I was in this building and everything was kind of being rearranged. And I was like, why are they rearranging things, And I was afraid I wasn't going to find my way in this new building, but I did and it was fine. And then all of a sudden that shifted from the building to I was laying on a table and I just felt like these hands were inside my back, kind of just like slushing everything around. And I just felt hands in my back physically. And it wasn't necessarily painful, but it was uncomfortable. And I kind of like whispered in pain, like, like when is this over or whatever. And I instantly heard back in my mind, I'm almost done. And I looked up and I saw two grays. And then they put me back in the bed. And I actually physically could feel him taking his hands out of my back. And so I asked a channeler about that. And he said that basically, yes, that was an abduction. And that was like a DNA upgrade that the Greys did after I went to the ranch in order for me to be able to tune into them even more and perceive them even more. So for me, I would say it was definitely a very large opening, like that's essentially for me, it just opened that door to the Greys and other ETs as well, but mostly to the Greys, where now they just are constantly in my reality.
Amazing. And obviously, you have a special connection to them in that way, which really, really got enriched at Skinwalker. Have you ever speculated about the deeper meaning of your connection to the Greys and how it's unfolding now?
Of course, I think about it all the time. I don't have the full answer to that yet. I've been told that I was altered by them to carry some of their vibration and spread that to society in preparation for contact. And that does resonate with me because I just feel such a strong connection to them. So whether it's, alterations like that or strong counterparts or something, I'm sure there's counterparts in there as well. I mean, we all have them, right? I definitely, I'm still kind of exploring what it all is and what it all means, but I feel very, very strongly connected to them. I have absolutely no fear of them, nothing negative against them. I just feel such love for them and this like desire to be with them. And, I also think that for a lot of us that do have these great connections, I think that one of the things that they might be doing is, because they kind of destroyed their earth in their own timeline. And so they were never able to kind of go through their own process of integration and transformation, right? And have that ascension process essentially. And I think a lot of them are kind of living that out through us, is my sense. So it's almost like that they get to complete that cycle, that idea for themselves through us. And, obviously this relates very much to open contact as well. I think that they also will probably live the idea of first open contact through us with themselves, if that makes sense. So it's like a completing of the cycle from both ends. That's just my guess. I think they're very involved in us, in our affairs, in our society. And I think many people are probably not really aware of them. I think they're very much kind of kept in the background, right, for various reasons, because there's a lot of integration that needs to happen, I think, between people and the Greys, which remember are just really parallel humans from another Earth, but they can bring up a lot of negative ideas and fears. And obviously, people have had their own abduction experiences and so on. So I think there's a lot of things there that probably need to shift, that are shifting. And I think I have a role in that. And I think that's kind of the agreement I have with them to help shift that, if that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. I want to go back to this idea of having been there a couple of times. And among other things, your connection with the Greys really took off while you were there. And you were there with a larger group on the first visit, but a much smaller, just a friend basically on the second. Did you feel sort of a progression, both with your connection to the Greys there, but also in the events that really happened between the first one and the second one? Just to look at how the chronology, how it sort of grew, the crescendo of it all.
Yeah, I would say that each time you go to the ranch, you tap into a different version of the ranch. It's never the same thing twice. The second time was very different for me because, like I said, the first time it was much more of like a social thing. It's almost like, you go on vacation, right, with your best friends. So everyone's really excited. There's a lot of let's see this, let's see that. The second time I was already more familiar with it. And so I think I was much more tuned into it on a much deeper level, I would say.
Hmm.
And I definitely think I did have more actual visual things happen on the ranch that I could be aware of the second time. Like I said, that mothership sighting, the sightings we had in the water, things like that. So, the skinwalker encounter we had. So I think the second time was much more visceral, much more physical. And one thing I actually noticed the second time I was coming back from the ranch was I had these really crazy experiences at the airport again. So I was coming back and I noticed there were a lot of groups. For instance, like sports teams or like triplets or like twins or like just people in small groups that literally looked identical. Once or twice is fine, but it just kept happening and it kind of caught my attention. Like I was seeing these groups of people throughout the airport that just looked completely identical, which is really trippy. And then I remember I sat down at my gate because I was waiting for my flight. You know how like when you have a gate, right? And your plane kind of like has to taxi out of that gate and it has to like go down to the runway to actually take off and land. I actually was sitting at the gate and I could see this like giant military plane just like touch down and land right in front of me, like right in front of the gates, almost like where they taxi. So I felt that was really weird that they would just land literally on the taxiway, and also that it was like a large military jet, which, I'm not an expert in this, but I would assume that they don't really use civilian airports unless they have to. So that also I found kind of strange that there was like this giant military airplane landing right in front of me. But, okay, whatever. I go on about my day, I get some snacks, I walk around. And then at some point, I see these people, this military personnel, walking towards me. And it was really odd because they basically were like in a row. So they weren't like next to each other or kind of mumbled in a group walking around. It was very like structural. It was like a row. So one after the other, after the other, after the other. And every single one of those people I passed, they just looked dead in front of them. Like they didn't make eye contact with anybody. It was very robotic. I happened to look at their nameplates and they were super American names, like let's say John or, whatever, McAdams or whatever. But yet every single one of them was Mongolian, like every single one. And it was like 25 of them or something. So I thought that was really odd. And it kind of felt like I was in this weird overlap. Somehow I thought like, okay, that wasn't really a military jet and these aren't really people. And I don't know what's going on here, but it just felt like something happened. And I asked a channeler about that later. And they basically said that, yes, that was an overlap between the ETs and sort of my reality, right? It was like this third reality, this overlap altered reality that was created because I was still tapped into the ranch energies. And another thing that happened was once I actually had landed and I was on my way home in a cab, the streets that basically you take from the airport, let's say, to my house, it's like a long drive and with certain turns. And this road was much shorter and it was literally missing certain street. The driver said, like, we're here. And I'm like, how are we here? Like, I know this road, it takes way longer. And so it just seems like the road had shifted. I was just in a completely different reality. And, things like that just happened more and more the second time.
Incredible. Makes me wonder what would happen if you went back another time, but I guess we'll find that out at some point, right?
Definitely, that's on my agenda as we speak. I definitely feel an urge to go back now. I actually kind of want to maybe not live there, but I want to be closer to that area so that I can visit a lot more because I feel that, again, it is just a place that's so conducive to having contacts. I've had really, really crazy experiences there. I've seen it for myself, and I definitely am planning on going back there, especially with the prediction that was made from Bashar and other channelers that I believe it was either going to be this upcoming year or the year after that they were going to discover the spaceship in the Mesa. So,
Yeah, 2 years from a very recent transmission where he said that they were getting extremely close to finding out what was in the Mesa. I was actually at that transmission. It's really, really exciting.
very exciting. I can't wait personally. So,
So we have something very fun to look forward to, and it's going to be fun to see what comes out of that also. I mean, one thing is that they find it, then how do people react to all that when it actually happens?
and also, Aishuva from the IL has said that we will all be pulled to be in certain locations as we come closer to contact. So I think that's going to be something that's very personal to everyone, wherever they feel pulled to go. But for me, the ranch is definitely one of those locations. So I think there's a good chance, that I will have more encounters there. So I'm definitely very, very excited to explore that more.
Yeah, and it's within driving distance of a lot of other places which also have vortices. So I can totally see that happening. But one of the things about this ranch is that it's not the only one. It's unique in what it is, but there's other ranches that are also there. Maybe this is a good point for me to just talk a little bit about another experience I had just to complement what you're talking about, which is when I went to Sedona for the first time in 2023 to a channeling event. And before the event, I had some time and some days, and a friend of mine was very interested in going to Bradshaw Ranch. And I always thought, well, that's very interesting. I bet it's very far away. But then I looked on the map and I realized it's about maybe a 40, 45 minute drive from Sedona. And luckily for enough, my friend had a Jeep, which was I found out was very, very necessary to go out there because it's on very uneven terrain. It's not like a normal road. You would destroy the bottom of a normal car. So we took the journey out there with this idea that just to see what it was all about. And both of us were very open-minded people and into this kind of thing and open to the idea of paranormal ETs and everything else. And there's two ways you can go to that from Sedona. There's a front entrance, which you can't go to because the ranch itself is, of course, cordoned off. There's kind of a high area in front of it. But the other way you can go, which is also something which the tour buses sometimes use, is to take a back road. So you go to the back road to get to the backside of Bradshaw Ranch. And when you get there, you're pretty close to it. You're not far from it at all, and you can definitely feel the energy. So when I was there, and I've mentioned this in other episodes, I'm very psychically sensitive, and so was my friend. So we went there and we just waited there, sat for a while, and the occasional tourist jeep would come by and leave. But otherwise, we were just there ourselves experiencing it for a few hours before it got dark. And we really felt the enormous energy of that. And we felt, first and foremost, that we weren't alone, that there were other beings and other presences which are watching us very, very palpably, not just like some spirit or something, but something very, very physically present and also sense this idea of portals and other things. My friend actually had some experiences with feeling like being talked to by a Sasquatch and things of that sort. And I've heard that they can also be in that area as well. And then there were also other energy effects we saw in the sky. The nature and the birds and the animals out there were behaving a bit strangely. There was like hummingbirds coming in and out of nowhere, and wasn't that many places for hummingbirds to disappear to. So that was also kind of strange. But in general, we just felt a very strong energy there. And people talk about there being portals there as well. It's a different kind of ranch or portal or vortex than Skinwalker, but nevertheless, it's very strong. There's a lot of stories about what it's connected to. And that's part of this whole complex of vortexes around Sedona. So if someone's interested in that and tuned into it, I can recommend going out there as well, or to any of the other mini ranches and places out there within those different vortices and experiencing those in addition to Skinwalker Ranch. So that's a fun place and another thing that people can explore.
That's amazing. And I'm actually curious, when you got there, did you feel like an energetic shift? Because I remember that's something we very much felt the first time we went there, right? So when we arrived, it was actually close to being 1 a.m. And so we had been traveling, driving from Sedona, flying. So we were all very tired. And then as soon as we approached the ranch, we all like perked up and we were wide awake. And you could just literally feel that energy shift. So I'm curious if you experienced something like that as well.
Definitely. Driving out there was a bit of a, let me just summarize that. It was a bit of an adventure because you're driving over huge rocks that stick maybe 6, 7 inches, 10, 12 centimeters or whatever out of the ground everywhere, and you can't avoid them. So my mind was very focused on just driving. So my mind was very clear because I was focused on that. I wasn't thinking about other things. So I was very much in the moment. And we got to within, I guess it was 10 minutes of arriving, and I really said, "Whoa, did you feel that?" And my friend said, "Yes, I felt that." It was as if we entered sort of an area where at some point the energy just picked up like that. There was a huge shift in the energy. You felt like, okay, now we're definitely within the zone where there's an effect here. And I find these vortices, they all have kind of a flavor, for lack of a word. I don't know how to characterize them, but each one feels different for me. When I'm in the main Sedona one, it's one energy, and when I go to that one, it's a very different energy. It was very powerful and very palpable and very intense. I will say Bradshaw Ranch is a very intense energy, and people who go out there and are sensitive to that will tell you that. There was other areas like Boynton Canyon where there's supposedly Kachina energy and things like that in that area, but Bradshaw Ranch of all of them I felt was the most sort of poignant and the strongest one for me. So I really felt like I was in a shifted reality when I was out there during the entire time. And actually coming back, I felt even after driving back in the evening, I really felt like that energy came back with me. It's a bit like what you experienced leaving Skinwalker and bringing a lot of that energy and the experience with you. It wasn't just your experience, but it was as if the energy came with you as well. And for me, that was definitely the case. For several days, I felt that very, very clearly also while I was at the channeling event, also afterward. So it was very intense. And I would also recommend people to just try all these things and experience them and just come with an open mind and sit there and connect to whatever's there, welcome whatever it is in, and see what happens. See if you have events and see what you see in the sky. Perhaps you'll see an ET contact event. Perhaps you'll see a nature spirit. Perhaps you'll see some other kind of cryptid or paranormal event or whatever. Just connect to something that relates to you in particular.
Definitely. And I think what you just said about like how you felt you were in an altered state, I can definitely relate to that because that's exactly what it felt like. It was almost like you're just in a different reality, you know? Like you are on Earth in this location, but at the same time, it's not the same vibrational frequency level that you're at in your normal life. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I can totally relate to that. That's exactly how I felt. It just felt new and unique and very, very different. Like you're experiencing a different reality, almost on a different planet in a way. It's not just that the energy is different, but the experience of just moving around and just feeling how the ground is, sensing how the air is, even how sunlight hits you. It's all just very different, as if it's surreal almost.
I agree completely. It's been said that ranches actually, the vibration of a ranch and why it's so conducive to contact is because we have actually, as a society in our collective, decided to create something where that almost serves like a permission slip to step outside of the regular reality. And ranches apparently are very conducive to that because they've been built and structured in specific ways where the energy is higher and it's also overlapping with other realities. And so you're able to skip more frames. They also have certain different geometrical structures to them. And so a ranch will almost like allow you to interact with a civilization outside of the typical norms of our civilization, if that makes sense. So in other words, it's something that we created for ourselves as a society, as a permission slip to be able to have these interactions. And so they say that ETs there are much more able to interact with us in simpler ways because different laws and protocols and energies apply to places like the ranch. And also, many other cultures, for instance, the Native Americans, are said to live in the whole vibration of a ranch, the ranch vibration. This is why a lot of ranches will be used and can be used to establish contact in various different ways. So, again, if you have an opportunity to go to a ranch, or even what's been suggested is you can actually set up your own contact ranch or your own contact location. This is something very similar. So, basically, the idea is you can go out into nature and be that a countryside, a forest. Again, ranches are best, but if you can't get a ranch, you can still create a first contact location for yourself. And basically, what you do is you go to this area, and this is a place you go to regularly. So you imprint it with your own energy, and you can bring certain material objects with you that carry your own vibration and frequency, certain rocks, twigs, crystals. And the more you go to these locations, the more you imprint your own vibrational signature frequency on it. And it almost creates like a mini portal where beings can come in and find you. And so you can very much kind of mimic the vibration of a ranch and create it for yourself and create your own first contact location and or a landing spot. And so this is something I've actually done myself because I used to live kind of off grid in the countryside away from civilization. And I had access to a ranch. So what I did was I set up some rocks that I brought with me from Skinwalker Ranch, as well as Sedona, the Red Rocks, and Upheaval Dome. And I kind of created this very, very large circle with the rocks. And I would just do contact meditations, invitations, CE5s within that ranch. And very interesting things started happening actually. And David, you may remember this, but this is actually when, as soon as I started doing this, I actually found two dead cows, like baby cows. And it was very bizarre because I'd never seen anything like that. It was the countryside, but again, it's just not like an everyday occurrence. You come across two dead cows, which also seemed to be in perfect condition. There was no trauma. There was nothing I could make out anyway, just from like first glance. Other things started happening as well, such as sightings or like trees would be completely uprooted and just left on the side of the street, strange occurrences like that. And again, I asked the channeler what happened with that, and they basically said that yes, you had created your own ranch, the vibration of a ranch, which kind of mimics the idea of Skinwalker Ranch, and it created a portal through which these beings could come in, and you could have these experiences kind of outside of the norm of civilization. So that's something that happened for me. It's something I experienced, and it very much worked. So again, this is something I would also suggest to our viewers is if you cannot go to Skinwalker Ranch or Bradshaw Ranch or any of these larger ranches, see what you can do yourself, right? Because there's a lot of things you can do to set up your own contact spots, even if it's not a ranch, but just the idea of setting up these contact locations, these landing spots for yourself. Again, it just imbues your own frequency in it. It's very important that you send out an energy of invitation, that you communicate, that you wish for beings to come in and interact with you through those locations. And you will open that portal and they will come in and you will have some very amazing experiences.
Yeah, I can only add to that because one of the things I did, because I haven't been to Skinwalker Ranch as well as doing something locally, was to realize that since, as we've been talking about in previous transmissions, distance is an illusion, everything is here and now. You can also bring those places to you if you're open-minded enough about that. So one thing I use as a permission slip on, for example, the Skinwalker Ranch show page, you can subscribe, I think you could still do this, to access to their webcams. And you can see webcams that show the various positions on Homestead 1, Homestead 2, and a bunch of other places. And I don't think it's a few dollars a month or something. But the point is, I used that for a long time and I would look at those. And while doing that, meditate on connecting to the energy there. And I also had experiences there feeling like I connected to certain kinds of energies and things like that. So you can use that as permission slip. I would still recommend people go physically to these places because then you're immersing yourself totally in the energy. But if you just want to get a sense of that and bring some of the energy through, because remember, the energy can leave the ranch, you can also bring it home with you after you visit. So it's not simply restricted to that. You can do that as well, and that can extend for a lot of people who may, because they live far away or for whatever reason, have more challenges visiting that ranch or any particular ranch, that they can do that kind of thing in order to make contact with it. So there's other things you can do. Of course, physical is really, really optimal, I would say. But, use your imagination. Anything you can do to connect to it and whatever works for you is, of course, the right thing for you. Maybe on that note, this is a good point to wind up. But before we do that, let's talk about what our general advice is to people who would like to go. Let's say somebody wants to go and visit one of these ranches. They're probably asking a lot of practical questions. What should I do? How should I do it? What should I remember to do or to bring or to think about or prepare for? Can you talk a little bit about that before we conclude?
Definitely. I would say the very key thing, the most important thing is the mental thing, right? So I would say, even though these places do exist and they're very exciting and you can have very, unique and altering experiences there, it's still very, very important to go in with no expectations whatsoever. Because as soon as you bring in expectations, thinking you're going to have this or you're going to have that or you're going to see this or that, that immediately will block the energies. So it's really, really important that you stay open and just allow whatever is there, whatever needs to happen, whatever needs to just come through, right? No insistence, no expectations. Obviously, those who come from the Bashar camp are very familiar with the formula as it is. But especially in places like these, I would say to really, really keep that in mind. Also, like I said, because for me, I wasn't necessarily aware of the experiences I was having in real time. It's something that when I finally left the ranch and I looked back, I saw that I was having a lot of contact experiences. So it also really taught me that contact experiences are really, really had on all these different levels of reality. And just because you can't see something right away doesn't mean it's not there. So keep that in mind. Also, keep in mind that these contact experiences very much continue after you leave the ranch is almost like an activator. I think once you go there, it will activate something in you, like a lot of vortexes will do or tend to do. And this is really no different. So see that as almost like an activator of something, and then just continuously investigate your reality, be on the lookout, see what else is around you. Just keep your senses peeled because stuff will be going on way after you leave the ranch. On a practical level, I would say those who wish to go to Skinwalker Ranch, again, you cannot go onto the actual ranch because that's private property. But you don't have to be on the actual ranch. You can just be in the vicinity of it because the energies are, again, that they're so strong that you just will be in that vibration nonetheless. There is a camping ground you can get to that is probably the closest to the actual ranch and the mesa where we stayed at. However, I would not necessarily recommend going there because they have like a curfew of 8 o'clock. So you can't leave the campground after 8 because they don't want people like kind of going in and out. But the thing is you have a lot of experiences at nighttime too. So I would just kind of look into getting your own camping setup, whatever that is. They have camping grounds, various places you can go. So I would look more into things like that so you're not restricted. Another thing to keep in mind is that the mesa itself and all the land is tribal land. And so you can just go on it. So you have to respect the laws, of course. But however, I think they do have these tours they do where you can book a tour with the natives and they can actually take you on top of the mesa. And I think it's like $150 for the tour, but that might really be worth it. So for those who really want to get as close as possible, that's something you can do. Yeah, I think that's about it from me, unless there's anything you want to add to that.
I would just add from my experience at Bradshaw Ranch, if you want to go out there, just make sure you take something, well, 4x4, something with four-wheel drive and a very high clearance under the car. And don't underestimate the time it takes to get out there because it's not a normal road. You can also take tourist jeeps out there, but I don't recommend that necessarily because they only stay a brief moment and then they leave again. It's just a break for them. And you're going to probably want to spend a lot more time out there if you're out there. So that's my suggestion. And of course, any other place you go is going to have other things you need to remember. But I think your advice about Skinwalker Ranch is really good. And there's a lot that people can get out of it, even if you can't physically go on the ranch.
Definitely. And with Skinwalker Ranch, there are stores in the area. So, don't think that you're completely off grid with zero access to the outside world because there's definitely restaurants in nearby towns and supermarkets and things like that. One thing I did notice was the phone service, the coverage is very bad in the actual ranch. So you might want to kind of, whenever you do need to be on a call, to kind of step outside of the ranch area a little bit. Also, the last thing I want to mention is I think the first time you go, see, there's a difference in whether you go with a group or you go by yourself because, again, contact really works based on your level of readiness. So if you go with a group that's, let's say, less ready than you or not ready at all, then that's kind of the limit of what you'll be able to experience. Now, this is not necessarily a bad thing because, again, the first time you go there, it's more just kind of to get the energies of it and to tap into it. But for future trips, you may want to take them on your own just to see what other kinds of experiences you may have, if that makes sense.
Excellent advice. I think that makes sense. And I would apply that to any place you visit with a high vibration or a vortex. So I think that's a really good idea. But on that note, let's perhaps wind it up. So this has been a really great exploration of Skinwalker Ranch. I hope we've opened up a lot of people's appetites to explore Skinwalker Ranch and a lot of other ranches around here and vortices in general, but to just realize there's a lot of possibilities out there and you can travel to these things. And remember, they're not only just in the United States, there's vortices in places like Romania and places like that in Europe, and there's some in Africa and all over the world. So there's probably something close to where you are if traveling to, for example, Skinwalker Ranch is out of scope. On that note, we wish you all very well, and we will see you again in another episode of the ET Base.
Great. See you guys next time.